Hey everyone, it's Allure. Today we're diving into portrait drawing, and I'll be taking you through the entire process, from sketching and flat coloring to rendering and adding all the details. I've included timestamps for each step of the process in the video description, so feel free to skip ahead or revisit any part of the video. I'm pumped to have you join in, and if you decide to draw along, I'd love to see your creations, so feel free to tag me on Instagram and share your drawings. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like and share this video with your friends. Your support means a lot. Now let's get started. In today's drawing, I've chosen a photo of Alida Grace, a stunning model with vibrant red hair. I'm aiming to use the reference picture as a guide, not striving to replicate it exactly. Drawing inspiration from its vibrant colors and gorgeous facial features. I aim to infuse my own interpretation into the drawing. Selecting the right reference is really important. Look for clear, high-quality images to capture every detail. Pinterest is a great source. Just remember to credit the model or photographer when using their work. I'm setting the canvas dimensions to 3000 by 4000 pixels, with a DPI higher than 300. For this artwork, I'll be using the sRGB 2.1 color profile. So let's get started. I'm starting the process with a rough guide sketch, keeping the reference picture to the side of the canvas, and I'll open a new layer on top of it to begin sketching. This initial step lays the foundation for the artwork. For the guide sketch, I will be using the 6B pencil from the sketching brushes, but you can use any sketching brush you want. To begin, draw a circle from the bottom of the nose to the top of the head. Adjust it until it fits well on the face. Now for another circle, tap your finger on the screen and press it down without lifting to get it perfect. Locate the middle of the circle and draw a small dot. Do the same thing on the bigger circle. Draw a straight line from the bottom of the chin through the center of the circle, extending it all the way to the top of the head. Do the same on the bigger circle. Starting from the top, go through the center and extend the line slightly. This helps maintain symmetry in your sketch. Locate the midpoint of the upper half of the line. And find the same spot on the bigger circle. This mark will serve as a guide as we work on detailing the hair. Now locate the center of the lower half. This point marks the approximate position for placing the eyes on your sketch. Draw a straight line to mark the position and height of the eyes based on the reference points. To draw a straight line, drag your pen without lifting it from the screen. Now do the same thing on your sketch. Locate the middle of the lower half and draw a straight line to mark the position of the eyes. Noticing that the midpoint between the lower half of the circle and the center of the circle marks the position of the eyebrows. Now, what I'm observing is that the distance from the eyes to the lower part of the nose and from the lower part of the nose to the chin is the same length, approximately. So I'm using this information to mark the bottom of the chin. I'm also marking the hairline, which is slightly under the first mark we drew. Drawing a circle to mark the location of the ears. This helps establish the overall structure of the face in your sketch. Continuing to the other side of the face, it's evident that the hair flows through the middle of the vertical lines we drew for the eyes and brows. I'm now examining the negative space between the hair and the background and applying this observation to a larger circle. I'm moving on to the chin and lower part of the face, and I'm running my hand on the reference picture, which really helps me feel the curve of the line. Try to think of shapes instead of face features. Identify the midpoint between the eyes and the bottom of the nose. This marks the position of the top of the nose. The midpoint between the lower part of the nose and the chin is also a helpful guide because it marks the bottom lip. Inside the box that you created, position the eyes and draw circles to roughly mark their locations. Find half of the lower half, and this is where the top lip is. Similarly, locate and mark the position of the eyebrows within the box. Now take a screenshot of the reference to keep it in handy in your library. Switching to the reference picture panel on Procreate allows for a closer view. Time to begin the rough sketch. Start by loosely drawing the basic features. Taking a closer look at each element allows you to refine and adjust as needed. This initial stage is about building a foundation rather than achieving perfection. Just focus on capturing the essence and overall structure. knowing that refinements will come later. As I said, this process isn't about copying the exact image, but drawing inspiration and incorporating the person's beautiful features, unique elements, and overall flow of the artwork. Whenever I want to create an exact copy, especially for accurate portraits or celebrity renditions, I find using a grid to be helpful. However, in this particular instance, I'm placing emphasis on capturing the vibe rather than creating the exact replica. Just infuse your personal touch into the work.
Whoa, shaky camera alert. Don't worry guys, it's just a suspenseful build-up. I promise the earthquake will end soon. This won't last for the entire video. I just didn't notice while I was filming that it was shaking the entire table. You can skip ahead if you feel dizzy, you can skip ahead. But I promise the quality will get better.
If you notice that some features are not exactly where you want them to be, just use the Move tool and adjust accordingly.
Now I'm taking a moment to erase the reference picture as we transition into the drawing phase because it takes up a lot of space.
After completing the initial rough sketch, add another layer on top, rename it to Sketch or whatever you want, lower the opacity of the guide, then start a more refined sketch, focusing on details and cleaner lines. Spot and correct mistakes while giving your artwork a neater and more polished appearance. If you're not satisfied with the final results, just go over it a third time. Create another layer on top, lower the opacity of previous layers, and repeat the process from the beginning. Ensure the eyes have the right distance between them. If you would place an eye between both of them, it would fit perfectly. Also note that the nostrils should start where the eyes begin. Now you can repeat this process as many times as you want. You can add another layer on top and keep refining until you're happy with the final result. time for my favorite part. Merge all the sketch layers together, lower the opacity, and add a new layer on top for the final line art. Choose your favorite calligraphy brush or any brush you want for the line art and enjoy the most fun part, going over the lines one last time. It's time to polish and refine your drawing. Now it's time for the flat coloring part. Start by pinching the guide layers together and erasing the reference. Then add a layer underneath the guide layer and rename it to face. Start by color picking a random color from her face by pushing your finger without lifting it until it picks up the color. Use the soft brush from the airbrushing collection. Create a new layer beneath the face layer for the neck. Pick a color from the neck using the same process as before. Add another layer underneath the face layer and above the neck. And this will be the ear. Select a color and fill in the ear. Now add another layer beneath all of the other layers and name it hair. Choose a random color from the hair and apply it to the layer. clean up the areas where you may have gone over the lines of the hair. Add another layer beneath all previous ones, and this will be our dress layer. Fill in the dress using a color that you like. Create an additional layer beneath all of the existing ones, and this will be our shirt. Use a white pale color to fill in the shirt. I forgot to add the other sleeve, so I'm adding it to the same layer. I'm going to choose all the cloth layers and merge them together. Now it's time to start adding the face features. Begin by creating a new layer on top of the face layer and start drawing the eyes using a white color. Add another layer on top of the eyes and fill in the pupils. Choose any color that you like. Now create another layer on top of the pupil. This will be our iris. Fill in this section with a black color. Now add another layer on top of the eyes, and this will be our lips. Choose a color that you like and fill in the lips. Sometimes I like to go over the line and use the erasers to clean up my mistakes. Up next, I'm adding another layer for the nose, using a darker color than the rest of the face. Try to form a triangular shape that follows the reference. The next layer on top of the nose will be our brow layer. Fill in the brows with the color that you like. Create another layer beneath all of the other layers for the background. Use a dark grayish color and a soft airbrush for a smooth effect. Sometimes what I like to do is I duplicate the line art and I'm keeping one as a backup. I disable one layer and start erasing the top one. I'm erasing the line art around the face neck, nose and lips. And I go back to the face layer and clean up the edges using the brush or the eraser, or you can even use the smudge brush to make sure that you have softer edges. Next, erase the line art around the pupils and return to the pupil layer with your brush to ensure clean and neat edges. Go over each separate feature and clean up their edges and selectively erase the line art where necessary. Now the next step is very important, and that's what's going to bring your character to life. Notice that the face is not just one flat color, but it's a mixture of thousands of colors of different hues and shades and tones. So mixing as many colors as possible will bring more definition to your character. For this drawing, I individually picked and incorporated each shade into my sketch. Notice that the color around her eyes is lighter, the color underneath her hairline is darker. So what I do is I pick colors from each part of her face and putting it on my sketch. When working on detailed areas like eyes, nose, and lips, use a smaller brush. For wider areas like the cheek, the chin, the forehead, switch to larger brushes. The key is to blend as many colors as possible for a more realistic finish. I understand it might look a bit funny and unconventional right now, but trust me on that, this will work wonders. Next, go to the eye layer and press Alpha Lock to make sure that you paint only in the white area. Use a small brush and carefully select colors from the reference and fill the eyes. Now go to the lip layer, press Alpha Lock and apply the same detailed process. Pick colors from the reference and fill in the lips. Keep in mind that lips typically have darker edges and a brighter center. Take your time placing the shades accurately. This will help make the next step much smoother and more effective. Now move on to the nose and start sculpting it until you're satisfied with the final result. Take your time to refine all the details and use a small brush. Do the same thing for the neck area. The neck is usually darker than the rest of the face, so don't be afraid to overdo it with the colors. Just keep going back and forth between the darker and lighter shades.
Oh, look who's here. This is my assistant, Jack, the parrot. He brings all the good brushes. And apparently he's got a thing for drawings. Stay tuned for his feathered commentary.
Moving on to the pupils. Pupils are darker on the top and lighter at the bottom.
Hey buddy, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but the Apple Pencil is not a snack.
Now time for the most satisfying part, which is blending all the colors together. Use a smudge brush.
Alright, say goodbye to Jack. It's a solo drawing session from here on.
Make sure you don't press too hard, just light circular motions and start bringing the colors together, trying to move the lighter parts and the darker parts in the right places. Take the time to enter each layer separately and continue blending, refining the details for a more pronounced three-dimensional look. Use a smaller brush, especially when working on the nose.
And now turn the alpha lock off and start blending it with the rest of the face for a smooth transition.
Start erasing parts of the line art where it's no longer needed. Now I'm lowering the opacity of a line art because I don't really need it anymore. Select the layer with the hair and press the alpha lock to draw only on the hair part. Begin by selecting a skin tone color to draw the root and the center of the hair. Then choose colors from the hair itself and apply them to your sketch. Try to capture the natural variations and details of the hair. Randomly pick colors from various areas of the hair and layer them on top of each other. This adds depth and complexity to the hair. Notice that the darker shades are concentrated towards the back of the hair, while the lighter shades are at the top, where the light hits. Keep this in mind as you continue layering and detailing. Then use a smudge tool to blend in the colors. Begin from the top using downward motions that follow the natural flow of the hair. Be cautious not to press too hard. Lightly blend the colors together without overdoing it. Now do the same thing on the clothes. Select the dress layer and start picking colors and filling in the dress. Do the same thing on the shirt. I hope you can see what I'm doing because my camera doesn't really pick up all those bright colors. But keep your reference next to you and repeat the same process with all the other features. Now let's get into more details. Add another layer on top of the eye layers, and I'm going to name it crease. This is a distinct line that will serve as a guide, separate from the others, ensuring it remains visible and doesn't get overshadowed. The next layer will be on top of the crease, and that's going to be the eyeliner. Using a dark black color, I'm lining the eyes. I'm erasing the line art underneath using the eraser. And I'm using the smudge tool to soften the lines so it doesn't look as harsh. Now onto the face layer again, use a dark brown color to line the waterline and add definition. I'm doing the same thing on the other eye, picking a random color from the waterline. Now moving on to the nose, add a layer on top of the nose, pick a color from the reference and refine the nostrils. I am adding details to the nostrils for more definition. Use the smudge tool to soften the lines and erase the line art. Once you're satisfied, pinch the two layers together. Moving on to the lips, I'm creating a defining line between the top and the lower lip. And as before, I'm erasing the line art for a cleaner appearance. To the face again, I'm defining another line underneath the chin using a warm color. I'm now further lowering the opacity of the line art because I don't need it anymore. Moving on to the eyebrows and also lowering their opacity, and I will start drawing them in. To fill them in, I'm using a brush from the Abstract collection. It's called the membrane brush. I find it really effective for creating detailed and textured eyebrows. Choose a color from the brow area and reduce the brush size to 7%. Now begin drawing in the eyebrows using the selected color. Start with small strokes and gradually build up the eyebrows, layer by layer, for a natural and textured appearance. Now I'm going back to the crease layer and I'm using the soft brush to further define the line, adding a darker color. Next, I'm adding another layer on top of the eyeliner, and this will be dedicated to the lashes. Any thin brush will do for the lashes. Choose one that you find suitable. I'm using the Gaussian blur tool to soften the look of the lashes, and then I'm duplicating the layer and then applying Gaussian blur again to give them a bit more volume. I'm doing the same thing to the lower lashes as well, using the reference as a guide. Clearly not that great at drawing the lashes, so I'm pretty sure you'll do a better job than me. I'm duplicating the lashes and applying Gaussian blur to make them seem fuller. Now I decided that I don't need the line art at all, so I'm removing it, and the only one that I'm keeping is the backup one, in case I need it. Let's add more depth to our drawing. Add a layer on top of the face layer and set it as a clipping mask. This way the shadows we add will only affect the face layer. We'll start by focusing on the area around the nose. Select darker shades and begin shading around the nostrils. Contour the nose using darker shades and use the smudge tool to blend the colors. Now merge the two layers together. Drag the nose layer on top of the head layer and merge them together. Now they're all on the same layer. Smooth out the edges of the nose using the smudge tool. Let's move on to the lips. Turn off the alpha lock on the lips and employ the smudge tool to soften the edges. This step works really well in blending the lips with the overall face. Merge the lips with the lip line and the face. To refine the lips further, use the smudge tool once again to gently soften the edges. Return to the face layer and feather the edges of the nose to blend them with the rest of the face. Before diving into the eyes, let's add a touch of light. Using a lighter color, bring some brightness underneath the eyes. Add a subtle highlight to the inner corners of the eyes. Let's move on to the iris now. Take the smudgy hairbrush from the material collection, add a layer on top of the pupil layer, and start drawing in the details. So silly me totally confused the pupils and the iris. So when I say pupils, it is the black part, and when I say the iris, it is the blue part. So that I don't confuse you as well. But forgive me, English is not my mother language, so just be kind with me. I'm choosing a light blue shade and alternating between blue hues and light white hues to infuse some vibrant variations. I'm going to blur the layers lightly by using the Gaussian blur, about 5%, and then I'm going to use the soft brush to add more black to the pupils. This will add a bit more depth to the eyes. Now I'm selecting a color I like. It can be any color you want, just use a lighter color. And I'm setting it to add and applying lighter shades and highlights. You can always turn off the opacity for a more subtle effect. Add another layer on top of the pupils to refine the details. Use a white color to intensify the highlights, making them more pronounced. Rename the layer to highlights to organize my work, since we're getting too many layers now. I'm darkening the pupils a bit more. And we're done with the eyes. Now let's go back to the hair and take a closer look. For the details, I'm going to be using the membrane brush again. It really adds a textured and detailed look. Locate the hair layer, then create another one on top, and adding individual strands to capture all these natural variations. Let's kick off by selecting colors directly from the reference photo and adding individual strands to capture all these natural variations. For a more three-dimensional effect, incorporate lighter strands towards the top and darker ones towards the bottom, just mimicking the play of light and shadow in the hair. I absolutely love working on the hair. It's such a joy for me. It breathes life into the character, it adds depth and personality. Try to go with more circular motions as you work on the hair. Use the smudge tool to gently soften certain hair strands, but be cautious not to press too hard. Now turn off the clipping mask and start adding some individual strands. I merged all the hair layers together and turned off the alpha lock. Now let's move on to the top hair part. Add another layer on top of the brows, and this will be our hair top. I always add 2 layers for hair, one at the bottom and one at the top. Now I'm beginning to draw individual strands on top of her face. Keep on blending those individual strands with the rest of the face. Draw some smaller strands that seem to be floating in the air for a more dynamic look. Incorporate lighter strands to add some more volume and create a more three-dimensional effect. Use the reference as a guide to determine where you place the darker and the lighter shades. Follow the natural flow of the hair, adding strands and details in a way that aligns with the movement and texture. For cleaner and more organized work, I'm grouping all the eye layers together. To do this, slide over each layer to the right, select them all, and then click on Group to organize them.
Now let's go back to the face layer. I'm going to add another layer on top of the face, and this will be our shadow layer. Add a clipping mask to the shadow layer, ensuring that the shadows will only stay on the face. Now let's dedicate some attention to refining the details on her forehead. Using a soft brush, darken the area surrounding her hairline. You can see that this area has orange and yellow tones. Use the smudge brush to gently soften the shadows, blending them with the rest of the face. Keep on blending until you get the result that you wish for. Now let's move on to the cheek area. As you can see, there is a distinct contour line. Now introduce some shadows to the chin area to add some definition, to get a smooth and natural transition. Apply a similar technique to the opposite side of her head, blending the face with the hairline. Now let's shift our focus to the eyes and the under eye area, adding some subtle shadows for depth. And add some contour lines to the nose. Pay attention to the inner corner of the eye, adding some depth. Use the reference as a guide to accurately place the shadows. These subtle details can make a significant difference. Pay attention to the area around the nose, adding some more details. Once you're satisfied, merge the face and shadow layers together. Clearly, I wasn't happy enough, so I added another layer on top of the face, and I added a bit more orange to the cheek. I decided to set the blending mode to overlay. That makes the color pop even more and helps it blend better with the rest of the face. Adding a touch of orange to the chin. And around the nose area. These specific areas are influenced by studio lights, creating a shadow effect and resulting in darker tones. I'm lowering the opacity slightly to soften the effect, since I'm going for a more natural appearance. And I named this layer Overlay. I'm adding another layer on top of the neck and setting it to clipping mask. Applying the overlay blending mode to the new layer on the neck and continue it adding more orange tones. These are the areas where the light doesn't directly hit. It just reflects the color of her hair onto her skin. I went ahead and lowered the opacity so it looks softer. Since I'm happy with the overlay shadows, I merged them together with the face layer. I'm now adding another layer above the head and setting it to clipping mask. Time to add some more highlights. Pick a really bright color from the reference and add a bit of highlight on the nose, the bridge of the nose, and the tip of the nose, following the reference to see where the light hits, and then blend them all together using the smudge tool. I'm noticing the impact of light on her forehead, and I'm adding highlights to the specific areas. Make sure you use a smaller brush for intricate areas like the nose and a larger one for broader sections. So unfortunately my camera quality may limit the visibility of bright colors, so I'm not sure you can clearly see what I'm doing here. So just follow your reference as a guide. Just keep an eye on the areas where the light hits and replicate the bright highlights. I'm adding light to her chin and the underside to bring out her shape more distinctly. I'm adding some additional light to the waterline and inner corners of the eyes to draw attention to these areas. I'm also adding some highlights at the bottom of her nostrils to emphasize and define the shapes. Continue blending until you get a satisfying result. At this point, I decided to use the liquify tool to bring in her cheeks a bit more, and slowly adjusting the shape of her face. Now I want to refine the lips a bit further, so I get the smudge tool to blend the edges. Add some additional light and shadows. I'm applying a light pink color on the new layer above the face layer. Every time I want to add more highlights or shadows, I create a new layer and then I merge together with the face layer. So working this way allows for easy corrections and adjustments without affecting the underlying layers. I'm adding a new layer above the lips and setting it to add. So I'll continue to add even brighter highlights. I'm lowering the opacity of the layer, ensuring that the highlights on the lips are not overly bright. Moving on to the eyes, I'll use the smudge tool to soften the edges to make them look more natural. Returning to the eye layer again. I'm adding a layer on top and setting it to clipping mask. And I'm also changing the blending mode to overlay to introduce some highlights inside the eyeball for some more depth. I'm using a very light white color, and I'm going to start adding reflections in her eyes to simulate the effect of light. I'm lowering the opacity and then I'm adding Gaussian blur to soften them. Returning to the face layer, I'll focus on the waterline and crease, adding highlights to define this area. Heading back to the lashes layer, I'll press Alpha Lock and add highlights to mimic the light reflections. The aim is to get a natural look without overdoing it. Now let's work on the clothes a bit. Go back to the white shirt layer and add a white thin stripe. Blend it using the smudge brush. Start adding some highlights along the curly ruffles. Add a darker color to intensify the shadows. I'm not pretty sure if you can see anything that I'm doing right here because my camera may not capture it well. But I'm focusing on creating depth by adding darkness where the ruffles curve inward and highlights where they extend outward. I'm also adding some stripes using darker colors. Take a close look at the reference to see where you will add the dark tones and lighter tones. Now, use a darker color close to the dress. Now let's work a bit on the dress. Go back to the dress layer. Select a deep color and let's start adding shadows and stripes. Heading back to the shirt layer, I'll add another white stripe. I'm going to add shadows to this specific stripe, so I'm going to press Alpha Lock so that I can only add shadows to this stripe. And I'm going to use a darker color to shade the stripes. And I'm going to use the smudge tool to soften the line. Time for some finishing touches to the hair. This is the last time we're working on the hair. Selecting lighter colors from the hair, I'll start adding highlights to the top of the hair. Just focus on capturing the natural tones of the hair. Using the membrane brush again, start adding subtle blonde tones into the hair. I follow the curves in the hair for a more natural flow. Try to follow the flow of the hairstyle. Some of her hair are pushed behind the ear, and the rest are just flowing around. This is the part where you get to play around and create different shapes. Just experiment using various shapes and adding a unique touch to the hairstyle. Continue to build and bring in more colors. This creates depth and richness in the hair. Selecting a darker color, I'll add some darker strands into the hair. The darker areas are where the hair is further behind, and the lighter sections are where it's more prominent. Perfecting the highlights and the shadows in the hair requires patience. Apply the smudge tool to gently soften the hair, but be careful not to press too hard to preserve the details. Start adding some thinner strands into the hair. I'm now choosing a very light color, and I'll start adding thin and messy strands around her face and head. Let's play around and add those final details. Time to return to the face layer and use a soft brush to apply some more shadows underneath the eyes, refining and adding depth to them. Do the same thing to the other eye. And I'll start adding some additional highlights to the eyes. Add a small circle to the right eye to simulate a studio light reflection. Then use the smudge tool to soften and blend it. Add a small half circle of light to the other eye. Also add some more highlights to her lips. Add a touch of darkness to her nose. I'm now refining and going over some certain lines again. Adding white or lighter colors on top of the shadows bring out the details even more. I decided I wanted to give her lips a more intense color, so I added another layer on top, set it to overlay to intensify the lip color without compromising the existing highlights. I'm also using overlay to color the brows in the same layer as the lips. Fill them in with a soft brush. And now I'm merging the layers together. I'm now adjusting the brows using the tool to lower them and bring them closer to the eyes according to their reference. And now I decided I wanted to use the liquify tool to the face layer. So I'm going back to this layer, I'm undoing the alpha lock, and I'm using the liquify tool to bring the cheeks slightly further inside. Going back to the background layer, I'm going to add a grayish blue color to the top. Time to add some texture. Add another layer on top of the face and set it to multiply. I'll use the oil pastel brush from the Sketching Brushes collection, and I'm going to pick a color from her face and start adding some texture on the skin. This is the part where you're going to be wondering, what is she doing? I can't see anything, and I know my camera cannot pick up what I'm doing. the texture I'm adding is not visible on the camera. I know you can't see what I'm doing, but you will be able to see it on your drawing. And to prove that I'm actually using the brush, I'm just going to press it hard so you can see what I'm doing. Just press it lightly and you will get a smooth texture all around her face that appears to be skin-like. Now use a soft brush to delicately blend the added texture, applying very light pressure to maintain the details without overblending. I'm now using a light pinkish color and blending the texture with a soft brush. Then I'm going to switch to a really bright color and I'll add texture to the highlighted areas. Now I'm going to add another layer on top, and I'm going over again with a very light white color to further emphasize highlights on specific areas. I'm also going over the cloth layer to add a bit more texture. I'm now returning to the hair layer and I'll use a smudge tool to blend the hair into the roots, creating a seamless transition. And for the final touch, I'm going to be using the light lick brush from the Luminous collection. And I'll start adding some subtle light leaks to the background with a white color. I'm going back to the pupil layer and I'm selecting the overlay and using a light blue color. I'll repaint the eyes, giving them a brighter and more intense blue appearance. I'm using a bit of black for the outer edges. And this is it, we're done. Congratulations on completing the portrait. I would be delighted to hear that you're happy with the result. If there's anything else you'd like assistance with, or if you have more questions in the future, feel free to ask. Thank you so much for joining me on this Draw With Me video. I hope you enjoyed the process and found inspiration for your own creations. Don't forget to like this video if you found it helpful, subscribe for more art tutorials, and hit the bell icon to stay updated. Share your thoughts and your beautiful creations in the comments below. Tag me on Instagram and share your drawing. And just remember, art is a personal expression, so embrace the uniqueness of your own style. Until next time, keep creating and stay inspired.